Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with the Black Sea. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of respond to the Ukrainian blackmail that they're going to destroy and attack every single ship that goes to the Russian ports, started their military exercises. There was a very interesting military exercises. The Russians destroyed a ship as a result of that exercises and trying to show the Ukrainians their possibilities. And there was another part, another side of the medal of those military trainings, is that the Russians attacked the ex-Ukrainian ship because they move a ship to the Black Sea, and that was the ship that the Russians capture during the special military operation. So trying to show the Ukrainians that they will attack everything and every single ship in the Black Sea on anything that will threaten the Russian area and the ships that goes on the protection of Russian fleet. Furthermore, a few days ago, the Russians published very interesting video from another part of the Black Sea. According to the author of this video, according to the Ministry of Defense, the Russians managed to discover a mine that was in the Black Sea, and after that, the Russians destroyed that mine. Furthermore, during the day, the Russians attacked and made massive missile attack against the southern area of Odessa. And the sources are saying that the Russians were attacking the bridge in Zatoka that connects, let's say, mainland and the southern part of Ukraine, this area. And this is a very important bridge because this bridge connects, let's say, the mainland and, let's say, the Romania, the NATO country. And using this bridge and using the southern ports like Izmail, the Ukrainians still have or had possibilities to receive weapon from the Western countries using sea, and after that this weapon was redeployed to was packed to the railroad to the rail trains, and those trains were moving to the north in Odessa. And basically the Russians made massive attack against the bridge, and there was another photo published of those missiles, and probably on this photo we can calculate 2 or 3 missiles. Some sources were saying that there were 8 missiles that were launching in direction. They were launched in direction of Odessa. After that few hours we haven't received any updates, and later we got the video of that Zatoka bridge, and according to this video we don't see that the Russians managed to deal any damage to this area. The Russian sources published another video. On this video we can see that there is some explosion or smoke somewhere on horizon. Based on these two photos and videos, very difficult to determine whether that bridge was damaged or not. And this is very important area. One more time, this area connects Odessa and the mainland of Ukraine, and the last port that Ukrainians have, that Ukrainians also use for the moving and getting the Western weapon, the modern NATO weapon. Now we're moving to Kherson area. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 35 soldiers. There were almost no clashes in this area. We haven't received a lot of video geolocations, just one from Antonov Bridge, and the Russians reported that during the day the Ukrainians were trying to move from one position to another. Maybe there was another reconnaissance team that was trying to discover and was trying to get some updates from the territory that probably is in the gray zone or was in the gray zone. The Russians, as you can see, were very far from this area, and after the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian reconnaissance squad, they attacked this area with missiles. So one more time, the Ukrainians controlled the Antonov Bridge, the Russians retreated, and the only thing that the Russians can do is to attack the Ukrainian positions, discover the Russian positions, and to hunt after the Ukrainian ships that goes along the Dnipro River. Now we're moving to Zaporozhye area, and today we got a lot of very interesting videos, geolocated videos from this bridgehead. And first we're going to start with Petykhatki. As we discussed during the previous day, the Russians, after a very long operational pause, the Ukrainians haven't made any attempt to attack Russian positions, probably even since the beginning of this week. Of course, this is very interesting. This is sometimes there are more questions than the answers, and that's why the Russians took a decision to make a small reconnaissance in combat in the vicinity of Kamyanska, and as a result of that attack, the Russians managed to develop their positions and to advance a little bit. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and shelling the Ukrainians in the village in Lapkova, trying to understand, trying to destroy the Ukrainian forces, the positions of the Ukrainian forces. As we see, as a result of those artillery bombings, the Russians managed to destroy a few positions of the Ukrainians, but yet we haven't received any numbers of those results of those attacks. And we remember that the Russians started and intensify their actions from Konovalovka in direction of Mali Sherbaki, trying to maintain the gray zone and trying to attack and capture, or with this very slow pushes, they're trying to force the Ukrainians to step back from these forest lines to the north. And today we got another confirmation of that the Russians were trying and attacking the Ukrainians forest line that was under Ukrainian control. Now we are moving to Ahrikov Bridgehead. There were no updates. The Ukrainians, as we know, trying to develop their bridgehead in the north of Robotina. Currently, they're doing some kind of demining process, moving more infantry, more reserves, more armored vehicles, but without any attempts to attack the Russians with a big number of forces. The Russians see how the Ukrainians send more and more reserves in this direction. Almost every single day, more and more tanks, infantry, armored vehicles arrives, and the Russians are trying to track those forces, and from time to time the Russians bomb this territory with the guided bombs. Of course, the Russians are trying to attack the positions of Ukrainian forces and mainly of accumulation of the Ukrainian forces in this settlement. Now we're moving further to Gulay Polye and to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Today the Russians also published another video how they managed to discover and to destroy another Ukrainian ammo depot somewhere in the north, on the northwest or the west from Velika Novoselovka Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We haven't received any updates about the real losses of the Ukrainians as a result of that attack, but probably the Russians destroyed another ammo depot, or at least we're checking whether there were some Ukrainians or not. After also small operational pause that took place for a few days in the north of Peryutine, as soon as the Russians realized and understood that Ukrainians, at least for the next few days, don't have any plans to counterattack, the Russians launched their own counteroffensive operation and pushed the Ukrainians on the northern bank of this river. And basically, they captured these positions. And the Russians published the video of an episode of those clashes. Basically, in this video, we see how the Ukrainian soldiers were moving along the forest, along the brushes, somewhere in this area, very relaxed. The Russians sent their drones to discover some reconnaissance operation, and as soon as the Russians discovered the Ukrainian forces, they start bombing and shelling. They launched a small artillery preparation, and after that artillery preparation, the Russians sent their tanks and armored vehicles, and as a result of that attack, they returned positions between the river and this forest line. When talking about Staromayorsk, as we discussed, the Ukrainians were completely defeated. We remember that some Ukrainian forces were able to get in the northern part of that area, but that was some kind of ambush, and after a few days of clashes, the Ukrainians were forced to step back, and also they left the northern forest line, and the main Ukrainian forces currently are located in Makarovka, and the grain zone is completely empty. The Russians also published the video of the usage of cluster shells from the Ukrainian side on somewhere in Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, in Petykhatki and the Bradley Square in Ahrikov, on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 175 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. In comparison with the previous days, the level of losses is almost the same, so we see that currently there's still clashes, but without very big battles as we used to see in the beginning of June. Also, the Russians today published more videos, more details of clashes of Ukrainian failed attempt to attack Russian positions in the vicinity of Ugledar. Lots of armored vehicles by the Ukraine was dropped and left by the Ukrainian forces on the fields, and after that the Russians took a decision not to even make any attempt to evacuate them, and they just destroyed the armored vehicles on the fields using the Lancet drones and different types of drone they have. Now we're moving to Marinka and to Krasnogorovka, to the coal mine. For today, and probably this is the first day when we haven't received any updates from this bridgehead. We haven't received any updates from the Ukrainian side, no video, no photo, no confirmation that they were bombing and shelling this territory as they did yesterday, the day before yesterday. Also, we haven't received any updates from the Russians about further advances and so on. So as I understand, the Russians managed to capture this territory, and of course with the very heavy losses they managed to establish 100% control, and they managed, is the most important, to dig in deeper. And currently the Ukrainians try to create new defense line on the north of this settlement, because the Russians in a month, in a week, will move their military infrastructure closer to this position, and it will also reduce the losses and will increase the chances to develop further the bridgehead, the Russian bridgehead to the north. Now we're moving to Avdiivka. We also haven't received any updates from this area. As we discussed, that as a result of small counter-offensive operation, the Russians managed to maintain their positions between Krasnogorovka and Veselaya, and just to return and recapture the lost positions that they lost during the previous Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. I won't be surprised if in a week the Ukrainians will launch their own counter-offensive and they will capture this territory one more time. So for now we can say that this is the gray zone, and for now we understand that it is very difficult to control this bridgehead, and the owner of this territory can be changed few times even a day. Now we're moving further when getting to Artyomovsk. As you can see, there are a lot of icons, and mainly the icons have blue color. Well, that means that Ukrainians made a lot of attempts. We got a lot of video and photo confirmation, not just about Ukrainian advances, but also videos how the Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions. So let's start with one single red icon in this area, in the vicinity of Alexandra Shultina, this area. The Russians claim that as a result of Lancet attack, they managed to destroy Ukrainian ammo depot and Ukrainian artillery system that Ukrainians were using to support their forces in their offensive operation in direction of Klishchiivka. The Ukrainians also were using drones, and the Ukrainians during the previous days attacked positions in front of Andreevka. There was a single tank that the Russians were using to spin down and to attack the Ukrainian positions somewhere in the vicinity of the channel. The Ukrainians managed to discover. I believe that the tank even didn't try to hide, and after that the Ukrainians was trying to hit the tank in their back, exactly in the area of munition where the tank has their ammo. And we haven't received, as you can see, any evidence that that tank was destroyed. Furthermore, more and more evidence and sources are saying, at least, that by this morning the Ukrainians managed to establish control over the western part, south and western part of Klishchiivka, but later this evening, somewhat 8-9 p.m. of the local time, the Russians reported that as a result of counter-offensive operation and as a result of artillery strike, the Russians managed to destroy everything that entered this western fortification, this western part of Klishchiivka. Everything was destroyed, and nobody have survived, and those who managed to survive was attacked and captured by the Russian forces who launched the counter-offensive operation. The Russians are bombing and shelling this territory heavily without counting their rounds and so on. For example, in this video we see how the Ukrainians were bombing the Russian positions using tanks from the hidden position, and that was some kind of beginning of Ukrainian counter-offensive operation to the northern part of this area. Furthermore, we got the video how the Ukrainians was trying to evacuate their soldiers from this area. As you can see, the Ukrainians currently do have possibility to send the mobile armored vehicles very close to the combat line, because this armored vehicle was trying to evacuate the Ukrainian personnel very close to the combat line, and that was very risky. Of course, it was very risky because the Russians either had a lot of options how to destroy that vehicle, either with drone or artillery system, and as you can see, the Ukrainians spent a lot of time for that evacuation, but probably the driver of that car was very lucky, and he managed to evacuate himself and the entire platoon of Ukrainian forces. A lot of updates are coming from the northern flank of Artyomovsk. The Ukrainians during the previous 3 days made a lot of attempts to attack the Russian positions in the vicinity of Zelyznyanska, and that attack was successful from the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians was trying to attack from Grigorievka in this direction. In this area the Ukrainians were completely repelled, and the Ukrainians was trying to develop their offensive operation in direction between Berkhovka and Yagidne, and that attack, according to some Russian sources, force was also very successful. Now let's start step by step. As you can see, I have updated the map, and according to the military expert Ribor, the Ukrainians managed to establish control over the forest lines in front of Yahidne, and the Ukrainians managed to get as close as possible to the settlement. The Russians, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, published the video of the clashes on this flank. As you can see, lots of Ukrainian infantry without any support of artillery were trying to attack, were trying to capture the trenches, the forest lines, and so on, and they were under very heavy fire. Of course, the losses were very heavy as well. Also, we got the video we've seen. I've already published this video on the channel, but from another angle, and we saw this video from the Ukrainian side. Now we can see the same video from the Russian side. Like 4 armored vehicles was trying to attack the Russian trenches. They got as close as possible. Basically, they completely destroyed the ruins, right, attacking them in 1 meter distance. But as you can see, something went wrong, and the tanks and the Ukrainian armored vehicles took a decision to step back. But the Russians started bombing and shelling them, and at least 2 armored vehicles were destroyed. And after that, the entire Marine platoon was also destroyed. And when talking about the northern flank, the Ukrainians published the video of the forces of 30th Mechanized Brigade. This is 30th Mechanized Brigade, and this brigade operates on the line from Zaliznyanskaya to Razdolovka, and they're showing pretty nice results, by the way. And those days, these forces of that brigade were storming the Russian trenches, the Russian fortifications, and as a result of very fierce and heavy clashes, the Ukrainians managed to capture this forest line, or at least to develop some trenches. There were no updates about the situation with this forest. I believe that this forest still remained under Russian control, but anyway, as we can see, the Ukrainians increasing the pressure and try to move further. Now we are moving to the back of Artyomovsk. We got also updates how the Ukrainians not just storming on the front line, they're also trying to implement effective counter-artillery duels. In this video we see how the Ukrainians managed to destroy the Russian D-20 howitzer. And on the back, behind the Artyomovsk, the Ukrainians attack another track with the Russian infantry on board. So anyway, the situation is very critical, but still the situation is stable, and still the situation and the time plays in Russian favor. For now, the Ukrainians haven't managed to establish control over even a single important fortification. They are very close to this situation. The Russian sources on the ground in the vicinity of Klishchievka reported that they can see that the level of pressure from the Ukrainian side is reducing from hour to hour, and currently there are, according to the sources on the ground, the Russians are saying that there are at least they think that there are at least 2 options. Either the Ukrainians have lost any power to attack, or they're doing the final regrouping before the final attack. So this is the feelings of the soldiers on the ground in the vicinity, at least, of Klishchievka. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 185 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. Now we're coming to my favorite front line, to Razdolovka, Veselaya, and Spornaya, to this area. You know that I pay a lot of attention to this bridgehead. I don't know why, maybe because nobody discussed this area. During the previous videos we discussed that the Russians, as a result of their offensive operation, managed to establish control over the railroad ways and to develop their bridgehead to the north. This is very important positions. And after that, the defeated Ukrainian forces of 10th Mountain Assault Brigade started bombing and shelling this territory with all types of weaponry they have, and mainly we were receiving the videos of usage of drones, a lot of drones, lots of attacks, a lot of grenade droppings and so on. And for example, today we got another video how the forces of 8th Battalion of 10th, 8th separate battalion of 10th Mountain Assault Brigade continue hunting and bombing in the Russian positions in the vicinity of this area. This video is also geolocated. As you can see on this video, we see how the Ukrainians destroyed another personal carrier that the Russians left during the clashes and so on. Some Russians were trying to hide below these personal carriers and so on. So of course this situation can't continue endless. Anyway, at some certain points of time you need to launch your offensive operation. And the Ukrainians, to be more precise, the force of 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, thought that they were able to attack. They took a decision that currently they can force the Russians to step back, and for some reasons the Ukrainians, the storming squad of that brigade, of 8th Battalion launched a counteroffensive operation in the direction of Russian position, thinking that they are able to capture the Russians. But something went wrong, and the Russians managed to completely defeat that battalion, the 8th Battalion, separate battalion of 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, and to capture a lot of prisoners of war. There is an entire room with an entire platoon of those who managed to survive after that attempt. So as you can see, the Russians also managed to develop their bridgehead. They managed to dig in deeper, probably to create small fortifications, of course with the price of the very heavy losses from their side. But anyway, the situation for the Ukrainians on the line between Razdolovka and Veselaya turned not in their favor, but in favor of Russian forces. Another amazing video we got from this bridgehead, and I have already discussed this video in the morning, and we see how the Russians T-90 tank was attacking these positions. At least the author of this video claims that the Russians were attacking using exactly this tank, exactly those forest line, and these forest lines are geolocated. And one more time I will calculate the distance for you. According to if we assume that the Russians were trying to attack and somewhere from this area, we see that the distance is more than 5 kilometers. I'm not sure about the technical possibilities of T-90 tanks, but the author of the video told us that he was attacking the Ukrainian position in a distance of 6 kilometers. I believe that this is amazing. This is sometimes impossible, I think so, that tank can attack for such a long distances. So, but this is the video we got. This is of course we haven't seen the real fly of the shell of the tank. I don't know, but anyway, it's up to you to believe or not this video. Now we are moving further to Siversk Bridgehead, to Bilogorovka. The Russians activated their clashes in this area. Currently, the Russians are trying to attack the Ukrainians from the north, in direction of the Ukrainian positions in this area or in Kremenaya Forest. And of course the Russians continue, at least they try to attack and to storm Bilogorovka. This is a very tough nut, Bilogorovka, and the Russians, I believe, are very unhappy that they were forced to leave this territory during the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation, and now they are spending a lot of time to return back this area. Today we got videos how the Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions inside of Bilogorovka, trying to suppress the Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian reserves, reinforcements, and not to allow them to send some forces and Ukrainian soldiers to the combat line. And meanwhile, the Russians were storming and attacking the trenches on the edge positions in this area. Enemy positions are very close to each other. For now, we still haven't received any reports that whether the Russians were able or not to capture, but the clashes here are very heavy. Now we are moving to Tarskoye salient. We haven't received any updates. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers. And on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 185 soldiers. And now we're moving to the Kupiansk front line. Also no video or photo confirmations from this bridgehead, just a video of another tank Russian attack somewhere in the vicinity of Novoselovska. Another tanks was attacking, and then there was explosions in the city. It's very difficult to geolocate the real position of tank attack. As I understand, the Russian forces, after small advances in Novoselovska, Karamzinovka, Novodanilovka, took a small operational pause, or the Ukrainians took, trying to regroup their forces before the next wave of counteroffensive operation. For today, we haven't received any updates about any advances of the Russians on the Kupiansk front line. They are storming and pushing, and the only thing we got for today from this area is the usage of the cluster rounds from the Ukrainian side, and that situation was confirmed and recorded by the Western sources. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on this area, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers. In comparison with the previous days, the Ukrainians lost 110 soldiers on this bridgehead. The day before yesterday, 70. So as I understand, there is a real operational pause on this bridgehead without any progress from both sides. A lot of very interesting updates continue coming. We continue receiving from Kharkiv area. Today we got at least 3 video confirmed geolocated videos how the Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions all over the front line. The thing is that the Ukrainian sources have accumulated significant number of forces on the border from Sumy to Kharkiv, and for now it's very difficult to understand whether the Ukrainians are planning to attack or they're planning to defend themselves, and they are planning to try to repel the Russian upcoming Russian offensive operation that according to some sources is going to take place or in Sumy region or in Kharkiv area. Anyway, the Ukrainians want to stay on the safe side. They want to be 100% sure that there is no danger for them, of course, because if the Ukrainians lose Kharkiv, it's going to be, I don't know, a complete disaster and complete defeat of entire Ukrainian army, forces, hopes, and so on. I think that the Ukrainians can lose thousands of small villages and dozens of towns like Artyomovsk, but if Ukrainians lose another region like capital of the region like Sumy or Kharkiv, this is going to be a final disaster that can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian forces and the idea itself to fight with the Russians. Because today, for example, the president of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, he spoke a lot, and he told a lot of us a lot of interesting things, and a part of his speech he was talking about Poland, and he was saying that he didn't suggest Poland and Polish forces to do stupid things on the western part of Ukraine, because as I understand, the Russians are not planning to give anybody even a square meter of Ukraine. The Russians, according to Putin's speech that I heard today, are planning to take control over Ukraine, over every single meter of Ukraine, and they're not going to share with Ukraine with anybody. I'm not saying that the Russians are going to continue their battle all over the entire Ukraine, but I believe that they are planning to stop at some point. When talking about military situation, but when talking about political situation, they're planning to establish control over entire Ukraine from Uzhgorod to, let's say, Lugansk. And I have no doubts about this, according to the speech of Vladimir Putin that he published today on the 21st of July. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.